So you've got your IRA and your 401k all in place. You're done with your retirement planning. I'm sorry, there's more than just financing that needs to be considered when moving from full-time employment to full-time retiree. As a matter of fact, there's a transition about to take place. Let's talk about that. Let's get to work. Hi, I'm Paul Pichot with Whole Worker, and I've been training professionals like yourself in career development skills for 20 years. Since you're here, give this video a like, and while you're doing that, why don't you subscribe to this channel and ring that bell when you do that so that you get notification every time I post a new video. Now, let's get to talking about those transitions that you're going to make when you go from full-time employee to full-time retiree. Okay, before we go anywhere in a discussion of moving from full-time employee to full-time retiree, let's talk about these two words and define them a little bit more: changes and transitions. Changes are external, they're contextual, and they're public, whereas transitions are internal, they're private, and they're psychological. Our tendency is to plan for the changes and not plan for the transitions. Now, it's not just us, the market sort of drives us there. Let's talk about that for a second. You know, the market sort of sees our retirement as a season of wanton consumption. So they want us to plan financially, and only financially. They see us just having so much time and, quite frankly, so much money to spend on every cruise we ever wanted to take, every round of golf we ever wanted to play. It's that season of wanton consumption. And retirement is a lot more than that. As a matter of fact, those who pursue it that way tend to feel a little left out in the long run. So let's talk about the changes and the transitions, especially, that are going to come down the pike when you move from full-time employee to full-time retiree. So what are the transitions that are going to take place when we move from full-time employee to full-time retiree? Well, there's basically four. There's a psychological transition, there's a spiritual transition, there's a social transition, and certainly a physical transition as well. Let's talk about each one for a minute. The psychological transition is really important to focus on. The data show us that there's a 40% increase in the risk of clinical depression in retirees. Yep. Fact is, we get a lot of our identity from our work. When we remove that, we have no purpose. When we have no purpose, it's really easy to get depressed. So we're going to have to work at that. We're going to have to see what it is we're going to do in our retirement besides take all those cruises and play all that golf. Then there's the social transition. You know, work provides a sphere of social relationships that we lean on. It's not just family and friends around the neighborhood. Lots of our relationships come out of our work environment. So we're going to have to find ways to mitigate the loss of that sphere of relationships. Then there's the physical aspect. You know, once we're retired, there is literally no reason to get out of bed, right? We've got to have a motivation to do that. We've got to have a motivation to move our body. So we're going to have to get some sort of physical regimen in place so we can make sure we're staying physically fit. And finally, there's a spiritual transition that takes place as well. This sort of alludes to that sense of identity that we were talking about before. You know, because we get a lot of our identity from our work, it's natural to start to be a little bit more reflective in our retirement years. And we start to get a little bit more spiritual. We start to ask the deeper questions of life. We're going to have to be aware that asking those deeper questions are going to produce a little bit of uneasiness in our life as we move into retirement. So we need some strategies that will help us mitigate some of that uneasiness or that chaos that could arise spiritually for us. So you've already done the financial planning for retirement. Let's use the same methodology and plan for these 4 other transitions that are bound to take place in your retirement as well. Let me give you some questions that you should be asking yourself in order to plan appropriately for these 4 transitions. Let's take the simple one first, the physical transition that's about to take place. You know, when you were working full-time, that was your reason for getting out of bed. Even if you worked in an office all day long and sat down at a desk, you were still moving physically. You know, when you're retired, you actually need a reason to get out of bed. You don't have to get out of bed anymore. So we need a physical plan in place. What are you going to do to keep yourself physically fit, to keep yourself active? Now, I'm not saying you have to all of a sudden put some things in place that you never had before, like going to a gym every day. That's not a bad idea, but you don't have to jump to that light speed step. You know, we just need to realize that we've got to move our body in our retirement. We can't get up out of bed and then go sit on the couch and watch TV all day long. So you're going to have some activities, whether it's gardening or walking or a physical plan like going to the gym or running, something like that, a little bit more strenuous, but you need a plan. So what are you going to do? The question is, what are you going to do to keep yourself physically fit through your retirement years? The data show that those who do in fact keep themselves physically fit have a much more enjoyable retirement. So that's one of the questions you want to ask yourself as you plan for this transition. What are you going to do to keep physically fit through your retirement? The second transition we want to plan for is the change in our social sphere. You know, as much as work gave us a reason to get out of bed and got us to move our bodies, it also provided a number of relationships in our lives. Your life isn't just made up of your family and friends, it's also your colleagues at work. And those colleagues meant something to us, especially if you worked in the same industry over a lifetime, 20, 30, or 40 years. Now, with that sphere of relationships removed, what are you going to do to replace that sphere of relationships? We've got to actually work at it. So things like joining a book club or discussing what your favorite topics are, maybe something related to your past career with your retired colleagues. That could be a good one as well. The question is, what are you going to do to replace those relationships? This is really, really important because many retirees find they become isolated a little bit because those sphere of relationships from their work have been removed. So, what are you going to do to replace that sphere of relationships that you used to lean on in your work environment? The next transition we want to talk about is the psychological one. And this one dovetails a little bit with the social one and is a bridge to the spiritual one, actually. But let's talk about the psychological one. You know, our work environment also provided us a place to engage our brains, our mental faculties. And in retirement, we have a lack of that. So we're going to have to look for things to keep us mentally engaged. Now, it might be further study in our area of interest, in what our job was, or maybe another area of interest, maybe a passion project of some sort. But we're going to have to find ways to keep our mind going. And I'm not just talking about doing crossword puzzles. I'm talking about actually engaging at a high intellectual capacity so that we keep our brain functioning. Again, the data show that retirees who keep their brains going have a much more enjoyable retirement and, quite frankly, a longer one as well. And finally, we have the spiritual transition. Yep, there's a spiritual transition that takes place when we move from full-time employee to full-time retiree. I said already in this video that we get a lot of our identity from our work. We don't have that work anymore. So the question becomes, how will you identify yourself? Asking yourself who you are is a very common question that gets asked of retirees. Who am I? What am I about? What's my purpose? All of these questions become real clear and very much in the present when we retire, when we remove that aspect of work from our lives. So get ready for it because it's coming. Now, there's a lot of ways to address this. We might take up a spiritual pursuit, maybe get reacquainted with the faith that we were brought up with as kids, or maybe explore some other faith, or maybe even just read into what we commonly call the wisdom literature to glean some answers from the masters that have come before us, people that have asked the same questions of themselves. But this is a really important one because, like I said, we get a lot of our identity from our work. When it's not there anymore, lots of people feel a severe loss spiritually. So, how are you going to identify yourself as you move into your retirement years? That's the question. Okay, so those are the 4 transitions that are definitely coming down the pike as you move from full-time employee to full-time retiree. But before we go, let me leave you one more option. What if you don't retire? As a matter of fact, lots of people in their 50s and 60s are deciding to not retire completely, at least not in that classical sense of, I'm just gonna not work at all and play as much golf as I want. Lots of employees and lots of professionals in particular are deciding that they want to expand beyond their career. Maybe there's some writing that they want to do, or some speaking or consulting in some form. Maybe it's an entrepreneurial effort. Maybe they're tired of being a corporate employee and really just want to go out on their own. Those options are wide open to us as we're in those retirement years. It's never been easier to strike out in an entrepreneurial fashion and start something on your own. Maybe there's a passion project you've always wanted to get to. This could be a perfect time to do that. I want to suggest that you don't have to retire in that classical sense. That you could continue to work, which will accomplish the transition, those 4 transitions that we talked about. So, what if you don't retire completely? I'll leave that with you. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that I had a free document for you I call the Career Expanders Roadmap. It's especially good for those of you who want to take me up on that additional option that I just mentioned. You want to take your career sort of to the next level and not fully retire, but do some kind of work that's related to what you've done before, or maybe even take up that passion project. But many of us don't know how to do that, so I've created this roadmap to guide you through. The link for that document, it's a PDF and it's yours for the download, is right underneath this video. You'll see the link right there underneath this video. So go ahead and download that now. Hey, there's a book I want to recommend to you. If you're anywhere between 50 and 75 years of age, you're into what we call the 3rd chapter of life. And as a matter of fact, that's the title of the book I want to recommend. It's called The 3rd Chapter of Life, Passion, Risk, and Adventure in the 25 Years After 50. It's a great book. It talks a lot about the transitions that we talked about in this video. So I'll leave a link to that book in the show notes below. Go ahead and check out that link. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this video. As a matter of fact, if you did, give me a like right now. Hit that thumbs up button below me there. And while you're doing that, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and ring that bell so that you get notification every time I publish a new video. I'm Paul Pachot with Whole Worker. Thanks for watching.